We call it Expedition Truth. And we know you're going to love it. You ready now?
Somewhere, among the many competing voices in the world, truth is just waiting to be discovered. So sit back, open your mind to a world beyond your imagination. A world where truth never fears questions. Welcome to Expedition Truth with your host, Jack Ashcraft.
And welcome to the program. I'm glad you joined us tonight. I'm hoping we're going to have a good conversation here. I think you'll find it interesting. A lot of us are familiar with the topic of the Jewishness of Jesus, but in that topic, it's pretty rare that we actually ask a question that probably seems rather redundant, but it's not. And that question would be, is Jesus the Messiah of Judaism? And I realize people out there are thinking to themselves, well, duh, yes, he is. But, that's not so clear to Orthodox Jews, Reformed Jews, etc. That's not exactly a open and shut case for them. And so that warrants a discussion. And it is one that I think that unfortunately is not covered in seminary courses on the life of Jesus, or in basic theology, and even in apologetics. It's sort of given a cursory gloss over because we're interpreting certain scriptures from the Old Testament in light of our theology, in light of Christian theology, and that doesn't really do much to help us when we are talking with Jews, especially religious Jews, and because they know their scriptures. If you don't know your stuff, they're going to eat you alive in a debate, in an apologetic setting. They will eat you alive because they know the scriptures. If you've ever had any discussion with a rabbi, especially an Orthodox rabbi, if you don't know scripture inside and out, he's going to rip you a new one. I mean, there's no question about that. So the very issue of, is Jesus the Messiah of Judaism, is at the core of any apologetics, because if you're a Christian, then you're assuming that, yes, indeed, he is the Messiah of Judaism, but how do you prove that? How do you substantiate that position without relying on typically Christian, non-Jewish tropes, to be quite honest? So my guest tonight is a longtime researcher and lecturer on issues pertaining to worldview philosophies and various sorts of religions. In this capacity, he's authored many books, and he has written thousands of articles for his website, and he's been published in apologetics journals and interviewed for radio and podcast programs. He's been on our program before, and listeners will no doubt recognize him. My guest tonight is Ken Ammi. Ken, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me back. It's a pleasure and an honor.
It's great to have you back. So you heard my opening there. Why is it that you think that this question doesn't get addressed by Christians in Bible colleges and seminaries specifically, because considering it is the central issue?
I would imagine that it has to do with that it would be coming up against rabbinic Judaism. Now, just that statement alone might cause us to have to develop some background here. So if I may, I'll do that.
Sure.
So I'll give you a perfect example based on a discussion I've just this past week or two have been having with a Jew online, a fellow Jew. He said, as a Jew, you're supposed to believe in the oral Torah as well, and that our sages knew what they were talking about. Okay, so I replied, I'm not a rabbinic Jew, nor was anybody in the entire Tanakh, of course. Okay, now, what's going on here is they're telling me that, well, there's a written Torah, but that Moses also received an oral Torah, and that was put into the hands of the rabbis, the rabbinate. Mm-hmm. So I'm telling him, well, I don't adhere to an oral Torah because I'm not a rabbinic Jew, and I'm pointing out that there's no rabbinic Judaism in the entire Tanakh, right? The Old Testament. And I asked, where is the rabbinate in the Torah or Tanakh as a whole? Okay, so I'm asking him, in the first 5 books or in the entire Old Testament, where is the rabbinate? And the reply was Deuteronomy 17:8. If there arises a matter too hard for thee in judgment, between blood and blood, between plea and plea, and different stroke and stroke, and between stroke and stroke, being matters of controversy within thy gates, then shalt thou arise and get thee up into the place which the Lord thy God shall choose. And the issue is that there is a system that is set up under Moses' leadership at the behest of his father-in-law, where it was recognized Moses is just spending his day dealing with disputes. And so judges were appointed. And then there's a reference to priests also. And so there were 3 main categories of personage who were involved in taking over the matters of the law and interpreting them and passing judgments. But that's a far cry from claiming that that's a rabbinate, right? The system of rabbis. Mm-hmm. So what happened in Jewish history is that the so-called religion of the Tanakh, of the Old Testament, was one within which there were priests, and there were scribes, and there were all kinds of judges, teachers of the law, like Ezra, right? But then what happens is when we were dispersed to Babylon, and then we returned, and then we were dispersed to Babylon again. So, I mean, obviously the issue would become, how can we continue being Jews when we're dispersed to a foreign land and we don't have our temple anymore, right? That is an extremely serious issue. Mm-hmm. And so that's why the rabbinate, the system of synagogues, developed in the dispersion, because that's exactly the issue that they were trying to solve. Is how do we continue on? How can we call ourselves Jews when we can't do our Jewish stuff, right? I mean, they might be able to do stuff at home, like keep kosher and all the cleanliness rituals, but what about the main part of being Jewish, which was interaction with the temple and the sacrifices? So this is how it developed. And so Rabbinic Judaism becomes sort of the main, absolutely, no question about it, the main denomination of Judaism. And then it gets broken up, as we're all well aware, into, say, for example, Pharisees and Sadducees and Karaites and Essenes and various other sects. But the issue is that Rabbinic Judaism would end up claiming that, what I mentioned before, Moses received a written Torah, but also an oral Torah, and that this oral Torah was passed down, guess how? Orally, and that's what's known as the Mishnah. Okay, now eventually the rabbis began making commentary upon the Mishnah, and that's called the Gemara. And eventually, we're talking 300, 400, 500 AD, this is all put into writing. The Mishnah plus the Gemara, that's what's called the Talmudim. And I say Talmudim in plural because there's 2 of them. There's the Talmud Yerushalmi, or Jerusalem Talmud, and then there's the Talmud Bavli, the Babylonian Talmud. Now, the Talmud Bavli is definitely the more voluminous and authoritative, no question about it. But so that's the claim. Okay, so that I find that this is not altogether uncommon. So, for example, in Catholicism, they'll claim, well, we have the written Bible, but we also have the oral traditions from the apostles. Or in Islam, they'll claim, well, we have the written Quran, but we also have the various traditions about the sayings and doings of Muhammad. So it's not uncommon that people want to claim we have scriptures plus, right, to lend us an extra bit of authority. And one thing I pointed out to this person is that that was just a claim that was made millennia after the Torah was written, millennia. And then they just said, well, okay, this came from Moses, but there's really no indication of that. So then I incidentally, I'm just going to throw this in. I asked him, well, but you know that the Kabbalists, okay, so now we're talking about rabbinic Judaism's mystical side, right? The Kabbalah. I said, you know that the Kabbalists also claim that Moses received a written Torah, and he received an oral Torah, and he also received a set of mystical teachings that were also not written down, but passed on orally. And he said, well, yeah, I believe that too. So, I mean, poor Moses, you know, he's receiving a written Torah, an oral Torah, a mystical Torah. No wonder his face was glowing, you know, his head was ready to explode. But see, my point is that all this stuff is just post hoc. It's just something that's said well after the fact in order to just lend credibility and authority to something that somebody wants to claim for themselves, such as rabbinic Judaism has the authentic oral Torah from Moses and his mystical teachings, and that's why it's not enough to just be a Tanakh Jew, right, like me. Mm-hmm. And in this way, incidentally, another correlation I find with Catholicism is that because your context was about why this isn't taught, this sort of Christian-Jewish polemics or apologetics. And one thing I find very common with Judaism and Catholicism is both of them will inevitably claim we have the original teachings and we've always believed the same things, we've never changed, and that's just untrue on both accounts. Mm-hmm. That's just something that they're taught that kind of simplifies everything. Mm-hmm. And makes it easier to just claim we've always believed the same thing for this millennia. And so that's kind of intimidating to some people, especially if you've not looked into that sort of thing historically or theologically. But it's very common. And it's also very common that both Judaism and Catholicism, to them, it's more than a religion or a theology, but it's also like a familial thing. Like I'm Jewish or I'm Catholic because my family is Jewish or Catholic, or because even sometimes my nation is, or my state, or whatever it is. So that's pretty interesting. So kind of circling back, I think one of the reasons it's not taught very much, it's because it can get very technical and very complicated and very overwhelming to kind of have to pick through, well, we need to have a long discussion about just how we're going to set the table for a discussion before we even begin it, such as I've been doing now and talking about how we'll most likely be dealing with rabbinic Judaism and what does that mean and what do they claim and so on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so then it logically follows that any claims on the part of those who believe that Jesus is the Messiah are really, they're not going to be refuted so much from the Tanakh, but from Mishnah and the Talmudim, correct?
Yes, I would say so. I mean, I've had experiences with this where, I don't know, somebody told me it's a pagan idea that God would take on flesh and incarnate. And I said, well, have you read Genesis 18? And apparently after they did so, they said, well, let's see what Rashi has to say about this. So in other words, right, in other words, I see what the text says, but I'm going to look to Rashi, who is a medieval, extremely well respected rabbi and scholar. Let's see what he has to say about it. And in fact, I have a quote here that I think is very exemplary of that. Jews have not changed their scripture, but they have absolutely changed their interpretation of scripture. So this is from a Jewish book by Maurice Liber, and he writes, "The church, it is well known, transformed chiefly the Psalms into predictions of Christianity. In order to ward off such an interpretation and not expose themselves to criticism, many Jewish exegetes gave up that explanation of the Psalms by which they were held to proclaim the Messianic era, and would see in them allusions only to historical facts. Rashi followed this tendency. For instance, he formally states, and this is a quote from Rashi, 'Our masters apply this passage to the Messiah, but in order to refute the minim, it is better to apply it to David.'" Okay, now minim, it means sectarian. Okay, right. Very common to refer to Christians that way. So he's openly admitting, we know what our masters have taught us, but just to refute Christians, we're going to change the interpretation. And so what ends up happening is a modern day Jew will say, oh, well, we've always believed that it's about David. We know it's not about the Messiah, when that's just not the case. Mm-hmm. He was commenting on Psalm 21, by the way.
Yeah.
So that's so common. We didn't mention, I wrote a book called Is Jesus the Messiah? A Judaism versus Judaism Debate. And in there, I have an entire chapter of quotations such as this one. And the reason I call the book Judaism versus Judaism Debate is because, well, this book is very, very close to my heart. And it's one of the first ones I wrote. And it was kind of typical for me to do research to satisfy myself. And then I think, well, I have so much research, I might as well turn it into a book and kind of open up my researcher's notes to everybody. Because what happened early on is that I started, fortunately, there was a library here in town that had the Targumim, the Talmudim, the Midrashim, like just tons of rabbinic literature. And I would go in there and just spend endless hours pouring through those books because I had read a book titled The Search for Messiah by Chuck Smith and Mark Eastman. And it wasn't so much what they said in the book that interested me, but that they quoted one rabbinic source after the other one. And I would read the quotes and I see all the citations, but I said, it can't be, it cannot be that the rabbinic material so often sides with what Christianity has been saying and against what the rabbinic Jewish polemics or apologists are saying. And so I went to work and I checked all that stuff out, and I found it's a Judaism versus Judaism debate because the rabbinic Jews have a lot of dealing with their own material that they have to do before they start claiming that Christians are mishandling the Old Testament, because in their material, they have a lot that absolutely agrees with the Christian view of the Messiah.
I should say, if listeners want to get a copy of that book, you can go to kcrradio.com, find the link there for Expedition Truth, and you'll find a link there for Ken and his website where you can order the book from. Now, Ken, the question arises then, should Christians have a knowledge of these extra biblical writings, or should they insist on the conversation being strictly on the Tanakh, what the text says, and taking it at face value rather than running it through the filter of traditions, many of which, as you pointed out, were developed specifically to deny disciples of Jesus the any chance of saying, well, see, that this is what Judaism has taught forever.
Right. So I would say maybe a little bit of each. We shouldn't be altogether ignorant of the manner in which whatever group we're talking with, whatever members of whatever group we're talking with, how they handle and understand certain things, because then it's very easy for people to be using the same words and phrases to mean very different things. But on the other hand, so I could very easily just tell a fellow Jew, look, I'm not very well versed in all the rabbinic literature. Can we just deal with what the Tanakh says? And I would doubt that anybody would deny doing that, or deny you that yes, we can have a discussion that way, and then maybe traipse into well, this rabbi says this and this rabbi said that sort of issues. Mm-hmm. So that's what I would recommend, is don't be intimidated and just feel free to say, look, let me just give you an example. If you look at the Babylonian Talmud just by itself, you're talking about maybe 10 books that are the size of your average Bible. So that alone is a tremendous amount of material. And you pile on top of that the Midrashim, the various, right, Midrashim, and then the just millennia's worth of rabbinic literature. There's no end to it. I mean, this is why rabbinic Jews have their own schools to be trained in this stuff. Mm-hmm. So, but the basic recommendation is the same for anybody and everybody. Number one would be ask, what do you mean when you say, right? What do you mean by that? And just allow the person to explain to you their point of view. And then just find a common middle ground. And by common middle ground, I'm not referring to presuppositional issues where, for instance, there is no common ground when I'm having a discussion with an atheist because they have a wholly other worldview that doesn't provide a premise for even any kind of cogency. But I'm not going to go down that rabbit trail right now. What I mean by common ground is just, can we have a discussion about X based on X, right? So let's see if what is the Jewish Messianic understanding, and can we focus on the Old Testament? Now, in that sense, I'll just give you an example of how the discussion would go on that particular subject. It would be something like, well, we Jews have always believed that the Messiah would definitely not be God, and that when the Messiah comes, he would bring world peace and liberate Israel from its enemies and bring in what they call the Messianic era, and that would be considered the end times, right? Well, that is very common to hear something like that, but it's extremely myopic as well, because down through the centuries, if not millennia, Jews and rabbinic Jews have had various messianic concepts that they've speculated about, including that there would be two messiahs, that the first one would die and the first one would be the conqueror, even maybe that the second one would resurrect the first, that one messiah would come twice. I mean, you have all kinds of speculations.
Right. We have to go to a break. We'll be right back with Ken Ammi.
You're listening to Expedition Truth with Jack Ashcraft.
It's just good, clean fun.
Intelligent talk for the discerning mind. Share your thoughts of the show by calling 702-425-9230. That's 702-425-9230. Find us worldwide on Skype at KCOR Radio, or jump into our live chat room at www.kcorradio.com.
Now the world will begin hearing us.
More truth than humanly possible after these brief words from our sponsors.
There is a world outside that which we live in, a realm where fact and fiction collide. The Paradigm Matrix. The Paradigm Matrix. Hosted by Willie Miranda. Every Friday night at 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern.
The Matrix is everywhere. It is all around us, even now in this very room.
The 1 hour show that will surely leave you hanging on the edge of the rabbit hole. The Paradigm Matrix explores a universe of topics from UFOs, cryptozoology, conspiracies, as well as all things paranormal.
Enter a world of the twisted and deformed.
Friday night, 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern. The Paradigm Matrix, exclusively on the KCOR Digital Radio Network, where fact and fiction collide.
You love them enough to do anything for them.
Mom, I need to be wiped.
Coming.
Including checking NHTSA.gov/the right seat to make sure they're in the right car seat. Brought to you by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration and the Ad Council.
One of the planet's most powerful antioxidant products is here for you to enjoy. Chaga mushroom tea. This tea has been used as a potent natural health solution for thousands of years. In fact, the Chinese call it king of the herbs. The health value alone is worth a look, as Chaga mushroom tea packs a punch with pure vitality and smooth energy. It's 100% wild crafted, safe, and effective. Get it now at arcticchaga.com. That's ARCTICCHAGA.com, or call 916-969-2678. That's 916-969-2678. Chaga Mushroom Tea. Chaga Mushroom Tea. Order your supply today.
Woven throughout the universe are keys to a hidden message, awaiting a voice that can decipher their coded meaning, a cosmic connection to the cosmos. Tune in to the KCOR Digital Radio Network at 12 p.m. Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern for Cosmic Connection. Cosmic Connection. Cosmic Connection. Cosmic Connection with astrologers Caroline Lynch and Merlin Wizard. Your weekly astrology reading is but a phone call away. So call Cosmic Connection Sunday, 12 p.m. Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern, and get your free reading today. Cosmic Connection with Caroline Lynch and Merlin Wizard, exclusively on the KCOR Digital Radio Network.
Welcome back to Expedition Truth. Expedition Truth.
This place is incredible.
Intelligent talk for the discerning mind. To be on the show live, call 702-425-9230. That's 702-425-9230.
What are you waiting for?
Worldwide callers, use Skype name KCOR Radio. Share your thoughts of the show on Twitter at KCOR Radio using hashtag KCOR. Even better, join like-minded individuals in our live chat room at KCORradio.com. Now, back to Expedition Truth with Jack Ashcraft, where the truth never fears questions.
Welcome back to the program. If you just joined us, we are talking with Ken Ammi about Jesus and Judaism. Is he the Messiah of Judaism? Before we get back into it, I want to remind listeners that this is a listener-supported program. And if you like this kind of discussion and you like this program, it can only stay on the air if people are willing to support it financially. And so if you're able to do so, we gratefully thank you and ask you to go to kcrradio.com. At the bottom of the main page there, there's a link for donations. You can give a one-time donation there. Just mark it for Expedition Truth. If you'd like to become a monthly patron, you can do so starting at $1 a month. Not much there, and going up from there, whatever you can afford. But you can do that by going to paleoorthodoxy.org or expeditiontruth.net. There's a link there to our Patreon, and you can become a regular monthly patron. All monthly patrons receive a PDF copy of my book, The Messianic Secret, which explores the so-called lost years of Jesus, and also have access to a small newsletter that I put together there just for Patreon supporters, discusses some of the things we talk about on the program, lets you know what upcoming guests and topics we have coming along. Sometimes I share articles or videos, etc. So that's just my way of saying thank you for your support. So those are two ways you can do it. The other way is, of course, prayer. We need all the prayer you can get. So if you would consider supporting us in one of those three ways, we'd certainly appreciate it. Okay, let's get back to the discussion here. Ken, you mentioned that this is a Judaism versus Judaism issue, really. So isn't it something that it would rather be difficult for a Christian to sort of wade in on? I mean, is it even advisable to do so?
Well, it'd be almost as difficult as it would be for your average Jew to weigh in on. I mean, your average Jew is most likely almost entirely secular to begin with. Mm-hmm. But let's say the practicing Jew, it's extremely unlikely they've had any formal training in like a yeshiva, right? Like in the rabbinic Judaism's houses of study, which in a way makes it more challenging, because then they'll be more inclined towards like the one-liners I mentioned before, that, well, I remember I was told that we Jews always believe thus and such, and so that's my argument. So in that sense, I would say the average Christian and the average Jew are pretty much on an even playing field.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have to admit that I've had Jewish friends throughout my life, and one of them has been a very good friend of mine for many years, since we were teenagers. And as sweet as she's always been, and she's definitely a secularist, a materialist, and I guess you would say she's a cultural Jew.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Right. And to see that, okay, so I touched upon that a bit before, correlating it to the same kind of idea in Catholicism. Mm-hmm. I mean, I used to work at a Catholic church, and there were people that would come in and say, well, I'm a member of this church because my grandma attended this church, you know, that sort of thing, mm-hmm. where it's just a familial thing.
Yeah.
And incidentally, I had been working for a temp agency, and they called me up and asked me if I would work at a Catholic church. And I'd only been a Christian like 3 months at that point. I knew virtually nothing about nothing. So I said, well, I don't know. Do they know I'm Jewish? I mean, does that matter to them? I don't know how this stuff works. So, yeah.
I mean, traditionally, the Catholic Church was not exactly warm and friendly toward Jews.
Right. I mean, they would let us do their accounting and all that, but that was about it.
Yeah, exactly. Hang out in Spain? No, you're going to have to go.
That's right. Yeah. And so the cultural thing is interesting, because that is one of the challenges in the apparently the question that never seems to go away, which is, who is a Jew? And traditionally, the answer has been, okay, now traditionally in terms of rabbinic Judaism, it's if you're born to a Jewish mother, then you're Jewish. And so that kind of causes some problems, obviously, because what if it's just the father that's Jewish? They'll say, well, then no, the kid's not Jewish. But again, that's rabbinic Judaism. And the Tanakh in the Old Testament, it's very obvious. It goes both ways. Mm-hmm. If your dad is Jewish, you're Jewish. If your mom's Jewish, you're Jewish. If they're both Jewish, even better.
Yeah.
So that's one of those things that, and I mean, okay, I understand why that kind of teaching would come along. Part of it was due to horrible persecution of Jews where, sorry to bring this up, but okay, let's say a Jewish woman was raped. So the issue becomes, well, is the child Jewish? And so it was like, well, yeah, of course, you know, if the mother's Jewish and the child is Jewish. And then the way that it was taught to me when I attended private Jewish school was, well, it's because you might not always know who the father is, but you'd always know who the mother is. So it's kind of a safety net, right?
I guess.
But so Judaism is viewed as being a theology and a genealogy. So that's why you can have people who call themselves Jews because of genealogy, who do not have a worldview in terms of a Jewish theology. And that's one of the interesting issue in polemics or rabbinic Judaism's apologetics, is they will say quite openly, I mean, I have quotes in my book about this, you can be an agnostic and be a Jew. You can be an atheist and be a Jew. You can completely deny the entire Tanakh and be a Jew. But if you believe that Jesus is the Messiah, that's it. You're no longer Jewish.
Yeah,
no question about it.
There's
However,
an absurdity there.
Of course. And then that's, incidentally, that is also just strictly on a popular level. If you look at the halakha, the actual rabbinic Judaism's actual laws, no, they're not going to get that out of there. You're going to get that, well, people like me are considered sinners, but we're still Jewish, of course. So yeah, that's a very interesting aspect of it.
So let me ask you a personal question. What was it that convinced you that Jesus is the Messiah of Judaism?
Oof, really, that is an answer that would take me 27 years to give to you. So I'll attempt to just condense it slightly. Just slightly.
Please, thanks.
Yeah. So, but I will go back into my childhood when I was in single digits, that I set my mind towards just trying to understand reality and what actually was true and wasn't. And I claim that that's when I became a confirmed skeptic, but a true and honest one, not a cynic, but a true and honest skeptic, like the Apostle Thomas, who said, well, you claim you saw this, so I want to see it too, right? Mm-hmm. And so that led me through years and years and years of considering various worldviews, religions, philosophies, you name it. And I had thought that I was so open-minded and just checking out all these things. And then meanwhile, I found myself in private Jewish school. And then I was bar mitzvahed while I was in Israel. I always joke that I've only been to Israel once, but I was there for 2 months. So that counts like for 10 trips worth, right? And then eventually I thought to myself, I've never given Christians a fair hearing, because who are Christians, right? I mean, they're the scapegoat. They're just to be made fun of in our culture. That's pretty much it. Mm-hmm. And so at the time, I was allowed to listen to a radio at work, and I enjoyed talk shows, and I ran across this station with Christians. And at first, I just thought they're just nuts. I mean, they're just certifiably nuts. They're going to tell me that they can explain my scriptures. Who are they, right? Mm-hmm. But then something really frightening started happening, which is they started to make sense. And I went through the stages of shock, no question about it, from anger to denial, but then eventually to acceptance. And I mean, eventually, it took a long time. And so as I explained to my dad, who, you know, on the phone with him one night, he was like, whoa, what, are you going to convert? You know, he doesn't speak like that. He actually asked me, ¿Qué te vas a convertir? And I explained to him, look, I'm a Jew who believes that the Jewish Messiah has come in the person of the Jewish man Jesus, as prophesied in the Jewish scriptures. I'm not converting to anything. I'm just a Jew who's accepting the Messiah. Mm-hmm. Right. And so it was a lot of factors. Some of them were very logic based. Some of them were very evidence based. And I mean, there's so much to it. But one of the bottom line issues for me was that the problem of evil brought me to Jesus. In part because I thought, well, all the persecution and suffering my people have gone through the millennia, right? If there is no God, or if God is not a personal being, if there is no Redeemer, then it's a guarantee that it was for nothing. That's it. right? And so the problem of evil made me realize that, well, let's say that we live in that sort of universe where, yeah, guess what? It was for nothing. Too bad. Deal with it, right? That would be a very nihilistic sort of atheistic point of view. But it's not a neutral position, right? That comes from various hidden assumptions, including that there is such a thing as evil in that sort of universe. Mm-hmm. But yeah, that could get me down a rabbit hole. So what I'm trying to emphasize is that I recognize that there has to be an ultimate redeemer, and that's what would turn all this evil from a waste and nothing into something that was itself redeemable and that was actually universally condemnable. I didn't just have a personal opinion that evil was bad. I could actually proclaim that it was absolutely bad and that it actually was evil. So there were a lot of aspects and a lot of background then. Like I said, well, what I was implying is that I was 27 when I came to accept Jesus as Messiah. So that was a long time for me to kind of trudge through various claims about reality and worldviews and philosophies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it was more of a steady process than any one, aha moment, really, correct?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Although I will tell you this much, I knew someone with whom I worked. She was a goy, okay? She was a Gentile, but she worshipped at a Messianic synagogue just because she loved Messianic Judaism and its traditions and the Jewish flavor. And one day she told me, why don't you ask God to reveal Yeshua to you? And you don't really know my mindset back then, but I thought, well, that's kind of arrogant. But then again, I thought, well, why not? I mean, who would know better, right?
True.
Now, there's this joke that a man came to a rabbi and said, Rabbi, I don't know what to do. My son became a Christian. And the rabbi says, well, I don't know what to do either. My son became a Christian too. So they go, I know, we'll go right to God. And God says, I don't know. My son became a Christian too. So what happened, again, this is just a tiny morsel of it, but I prayed to God about, well, I've been hearing about this Jesus, and who better to tell me about it than you, right? Mm-hmm. And you'd kind of maybe imagine the clouds would part at that moment and I'd hear this voice of revelation, but it didn't happen. What happened is, because God's timing is perfect, he knew that a few weeks later I would be laying on my bed feeling just pathetic and defeated and like a big loser and you name it. And that's when I truly believe I heard that still small voice. And well, everything changed since then.
Mm-hmm. I once had a discussion with a rabbi, and his main argument against the concept of Jesus as Messiah was sort of surprising to me, because it's not one that I'd ever heard before. And he argued that really all that the Christian theology of Jesus is a Gnostic form of Judaism. What would you say to that?
First of all, I'm not sure how a rabbi would. Did you say it was a rabbi?
Yes, he was a rabbi.
Okay.
And that was his argument.
Yeah, I'm kind of surprised a rabbi would have a problem, an implied problem with the Gnostic form of Judaism, because, like I said before, they have their own mysticism. So I'm not sure what the problem would be with that. But no, I think that what that hints of to me is a hidden assumption about something I mentioned earlier, which is the view that, well, what Jesus taught would be like something like the pagans would teach, except that such is not the case, because you can find likenesses to the teachings of Jesus and the Christian view of what the Messiah would be within rabbinic Judaism's own most authoritative writings. That's part of what my book is all about. Is just a tremendous amount of quotations from rabbinic literature. And so I would think that it's mostly based on sort of a generic presupposition that, well, we Jews don't believe the sort of things that Jesus said, when, well, in actuality, you'd be surprised what you'll find within your own literature.
Mm-hmm. I think his arguments were based more on the writings of Saul. I think that's really what got him going on that. Because
Saul of Tarsus.
Yes.
Okay, Paul the Apostle.
Paul
AKA,
the Apostle. Yeah. Because, as you know, Paul's writings, while in seminary they don't say so, they do have a sort of mystical quality to them. Especially when we start talking about, the Messiah and the quote body of Messiah, things like that. These are sort of, I guess you could say, mystical concepts. So I think that's really where his argument was rooted. And
it's not uncommon for various kinds of people, including people involved in branches of Messianic Judaism, such as Hebrew roots, to claim that Paul was essentially a corrupter of Jesus' message. And I think that besides what you mentioned, I think another aspect of it too is that the reason why Jesus and Paul could be viewed as being very different in what they were doing, because what they were doing was very different. Jesus is an itinerant preacher, but Paul is helping to establish churches and then training them up in the way that they should go and dealing with their problems. So they have very different ministries. So Paul is getting into very many extremely detailed issues that Jesus might have just preached as he had to present a succinct message because he knew he'd be moving on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think also the audience for Jesus was primarily Jewish, whereas Paul, his was primarily Gentile, pagan, and he would have to address it in language that they would readily understand. Wouldn't you say that that's correct?
Yes, I definitely would, especially initially. Jesus was very clear that he was to go to the house of Israel, and that's where he directed his apostles. Mm-hmm. And then once they started discerning their reaction, they said, okay, we've given our own people a fair amount of time to accept the message, and now it's time to move to the Gentiles, because after all, that the Goy would come to the one true God was predicted many times in the Tanakh and the Old Testament. So they were showing how they were moving from one to the other. Let me mention one thing, just perhaps incidentally, perhaps actually correlating, which is that if you read rabbinic literature, it's very much like this. Rabbi so-and-so taught that Rabbi so-and-so said, in the name of Rabbi so-and-so, that Rabbi so-and-so said this, right?
Yeah.
And now they're doing that for a few reasons, including building authority, right? It's not just me saying it. Look, this rabbi said it, he was quoting that rabbi and that rabbi. And so you start recognizing, okay, you're building the authority behind your claim, and you're trying to demonstrate that it's not something new and unique, but it's kind of tradition, like Rashi was saying, our masters taught this, right? And one of the unique features about Jesus, which is even mentioned in the New Testament, was just the way he spoke blew people's minds, because he'd get out there and say, I say unto you. He wouldn't even say, thus saith the Lord. He's like, I say unto you. Mm-hmm. And that's why in the New Testament stated that people were astonished at his authority, because he wasn't appealing to anybody else, but that he was the authoritative one.
Yeah. Scripture actually says he spoke as one having authority.
That's right. Or he would point out that he was saying the things that the Father had for him to say, mm-hmm. but he wouldn't be appealing to any human sources like it was common in rabbinic Judaism.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. As a matter of fact, when he does reference them, it's to show them, even your traditions say this and you're not doing it.
Right. or the difference between you have heard it said, right, versus it is written. That's important too. because of the issue of the alleged oral Torah versus the written Torah.
You have your own YouTube channel. Why don't you tell my listeners a little bit about your YouTube channel and what you have going on there?
Oh, there's times where I just totally give up on it because you know how YouTube can be. They want to strike videos for everything. So,
oh yeah.
But yeah, mostly what I do on it is just post some of my lectures, and then the shows that allow me to repost my interviews, I'll do that. That's mostly what I've been doing. And then, of course, whenever I publish a new book, I'll make myself a little ad and post it on there. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, there is plenty of stuff on there for people to check out.
Yeah. I've been to the channel many times myself. Listened to quite a few of the discussions, and
I guess I'm playing it down. But one thing that I just remembered that's contextual is I am about to post some of the older lectures that I presented on issues exactly like the kind we're discussing right now. So that's coming up in the near future.
Mm-hmm. Good. For those of you listening on YouTube, you'll find a link to Ken's website and his YouTube channel in the description to this video. I ask you to like, share, subscribe if you enjoy this program, and go over to Ken's channel and check that out, and subscribe there as well. I think you'll enjoy a lot of the discussions he has over there. Some fascinating stuff, some deep stuff. You're going to get into some deep conversations over there. So you better have your big boy pants on when you go to Ken's channel. It's not a place for the faint of heart.
Yeah, put on your big boy pants with your fringes hanging off of them.
Exactly. All right, Ken, thanks for joining us tonight.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure and honor. God bless.
All right, good night. And from us here at Expedition Truth, you have a good weekend. God bless.
You've been listening to Expedition Truth, hosted by Jack Ashcraft. It's time to believe in the unbelievable. Live every Thursday night, 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on the KCOR Digital Radio Network. For more information on Jack Ashcraft, the show, as well as his guests, please visit his website at www.paleoorthodoxy.com. Expedition Truth. Intelligent talk for the discerning mind. Why? Because the truth never fears questions.
This is KCOR Las Vegas, home of the Digital Radio Network, broadcasting from a shack just south of Area 51. Wait, that doesn't exist. This is the